Hello and welcome to Safe Schools. I'm Commander Curtis Graves with the Mobile Police Department.
I'm Andy Howard from Mobile County Public School System.
Andy, I think we're going to have a great show today. I say that all the time though, right?
You do, but typically that's true, man. So
yeah.
far you're winning.
Yeah, so far. But I'm excited to have this discussion today. I think we're going to be talking about implicit bias.
Yeah, it's two words that have more meaning than just the two words, and I just thought it was important
I like
that
that.
we ought to do a deep dive on and have some discussion that covers that.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. We'll be right back.
It's a fact. Bullying happens. Bullying can lead to serious physical and emotional pain. But there are some things you can do to prevent or stop it. Stand up for the person who's being bullied. Let the bully know that it's not cool to pick on others. Take action by reporting the bully to a teacher or principal. In the end, when you help someone who's being bullied, you are also helping yourself.
And we're back. I'm just really just excited, Curtis. But I'm excited, in a real way because I've known our guest since she was a little kid.
Oh, wow. Y'all
And
go back a ways, huh?
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm impressed with the life she's managed to live.
Okay. Cool.
Dr. Elizabeth Schlosser, but I've known her since she was little Elizabeth Cox.
Okay.
I just thought that we could have a conversation today with a person who could bring some levity to a conversation we keep hearing secondary instead of primary conversation about. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Schlosser,
Nice to be here. So,
Tell us a little bit about yourself first.
please.
well, I am a product of the Mobile County Public School System. I attended Linecoff Elementary. I went to Palmer Pillins Middle School. I graduated from Murphy High School in 19, and I also took classes at Bishop State. And I went on to the University of Mobile. I got my master's from the Alabama State and my PhD from the University of Southern Mississippi.
Okay.
And you work at Bishop State now.
I do. I also worked in the Mobile Public School System as a science teacher at Shaw High School when it was Shaw High School many years ago.
Okay.
And then I only did that for about 4 or 5 years, and then I was employed full time to teach science at Bishop State Community College.
So I'm gonna go a little deeper into Dr. Schlosser's connection to the school district. Her father was one of the first 2 African American school board members, Colonel Cox. Her sister's an assistant principal in the school district now, and her mother's a retired nurse from the school district. So she has a lot of
Long history,
lineage
yeah.
in this school district.
Yes, we're well vested.
Yeah.
So
that you are.
she's one of our own, and I appreciate you coming back and offering the wealth of knowledge that you've acquired in your skill set. The purpose of us having this conversation today comes from a conversation that you and I had a while ago about what you studied in your doctoral dissertation. Could you expound a little bit about that?
Yes, my dissertation, the research that I conducted was on implicit bias. And in fact, I used the teachers here. I was given permission through the Mobile County Public School System to research them. I gave them an implicit association test. It's a Harvard implicit race test. And I was able to garner a lot of information about perhaps why we have achievement gaps between African American students who are in STEM programs like science and math, and whether it was attributed to an implicit bias. Implicit bias is really unconscious thoughts that we have that are garnered from an early age. They're acquired through hearsay, media, stereotypes that aren't necessarily true. But it does impact the attitudes of teachers. It impacts the attitudes of the relationships that we have with other people. It's not just limited to that, though my research was limited to that, that particular area.
Subdiscipline. So make that the distinction for me. Explicit and implicit bias. What are the distinctive differences between those two things?
Well, explicit bias is something that is done intentionally. It is with intention, and it is acute. There's no thinking that you meant something other than what you said.
An example of explicit bias might be?
A racial slur
Okay.
would be an example of that. Derogatory tone may be more implicit because it's not something that's just can be perceived in another way. Perhaps I'm giving you a command to do something, but because I haven't used a derogatory term towards you, there could be some leeway in your consciousness. When we talk about implicit bias, it has to do with an unconscious thing that occurs. It, like I said, it is something that develops from childhood. And what I did notice from my research with the teachers is that regardless of age, they still had the same implicit biases. So being a younger teacher doesn't make you less biased than an older teacher, which means that this is taught from, from the cradle. Yes. Now, how do we change that? We know that implicit bias is controlled by the amygdala in the brain. And this is a maladaptive part that can be, it's like a bad habit. You can change it. It is changeable. But you have to recognize that you have it. So implicit bias is important in that we at least make people aware that they have them. Otherwise, you're going around with an undiagnosed sort of disease. And now you recognize that you have it, then there are certain strategies that you can use to change them.
So we're talking about cognitive behavior.
It is. It's a cognitive behavior that is changeable, but it has to be recognized first.
Right. First, you've got to, to the disease analogy, we're going to take a break, actually, because I don't want to get started on that and not be able to dig deeper, but we'll be right back.
The Environmental Studies Center is a natural sciences education facility designed to provide unique learning experiences. In addition, wildlife rehabilitation plays a vital role each day at the center. Featuring more than 500 acres of rich woodlands, the center affords teachers, students, and the general public an opportunity to experience firsthand the natural environment. Environmental Studies Center. It starts with us in the Mobile County Public Schools.
Hello, I'm Renee Phillips, your host of Homeroom. Will you join us as we talk with the students, teachers, and staff about all of the great things happening in our schools?
That's right, Renee. Not only are we here to keep you informed about the great things happening in our schools, but to also keep you updated on safety issues.
Our show, Safe Schools, looks at ways to keep your child and our students safe. Not only are we looking at ways to keep your child and our students safe, but to keep you informed on how to connect with us.
Manténgase informado aquí en Conexión a Padres.
And we also score big from pre-K to high school with MCPSS Athletics.
And then Inside Education puts it all together for you, showing you the ins and outs about news and events taking place across the Mobile County Public School District. We do this to keep you informed.
And we're back. So you were about to explain, and I interrupted you, but I want to get you to dig deeper in what you were saying.
Well, this part of the brain, it is unconscious, and when we say it's unconscious, you are not aware of it, and everyone has implicit bias. So it's not relegated to someone because of their gender, or because they're Asian, or they're African American, or whatever. It is something that we all harbor. Implicit bias, people might have a positive outlook on African Americans, but still have an association with them and guns. Or they may have an implicit bias towards Asians and think they have high math aptitude, but then have a negative connotation tied to them because they're Asian. So these are things that are unconscious, but they are things that can be relegated, identify them for what they are, and hopefully help people to develop strategies so they don't use them. If you identify them, then you'll be able to mitigate problems easier. You know, it has a lot to do with hiring practices that people impose on other people because of these implicit biases that this person may not be well suited for a job just because of their race and not because of the skill set that they have.
Right.
But the underlying thing is the implicit bias.
So who is this training appropriate for? Is there any ideal group that training would benefit, or is it a training that virtually anybody would benefit from, or you know, where do we target that effort in terms of training people?
Well, the training would benefit everyone because it's a part of self-awareness, it's a part of improving the self, but the people who make policies, our congressmen, our legislators, our senators, they need to have some implicit bias awareness training. Because these are the people that are affecting us. The policies that they make hinder minorities or other aspects of our society are, you know, it's kind of a very complex sort of thing because there are many layers to this.
Yes.
But those are the people who are most impactful on our way of life, and they need to have this. They need to be educated on these things.
On the local level, we're talking about, let's say we're talking about public education. Who should be in the forefront of that in terms of spearheading that effort?
I believe that our superintendent, it has to start at the top. And because there is a trickle-down policy effect that occurs, and that once that is implemented, it's going to make its way through positively and impact not just those people who are administrators, their hiring practices, or your teachers, but the relationships that teachers have with their students and administrators.
So
relationships in general.
You know, one of the things that made me want to have this conversation was, you know, I turn on the television almost every day and I hear this phrase, implicit bias. And I just wonder sometimes when I'm listening to that reporter say that term, it suggests that this is some sort of adversarial dynamic plan to polarize people. And from talking to you in your training, that's not it at all. So how do we redirect that thought process that is something adversarial, implicit bias training?
You know, I think anytime people have to experience some sort of change or introduction to something new, you're always going to have a little adversity. Mm-hmm. But I think that once people realize that this is something that they are not innately control of, that it really is not by any fault of their own, that this is something that does need to be addressed, mm-hmm. that I think the perspective will change. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm giving you a few facts about it, but there's a whole dynamic, and I think that once people understand that, they mm-hmm. It'll be positive. It'll mm-hmm. be received positively.
So we talk about, you know, the decision makers, you know, the leadership, and, you know, a lot of times what I've heard it talked about, it's like, well, the police ought to have implicit bias training, but you're saying that educators ought to have implicit bias training.
Well, I think it goes deeper. I think
but it's everybody.
Yeah, it goes deeper. Law enforcement here has gone through implicit bias training.
Right.
But it's not something that you can do once.
Right.
It has to be something that is done on a continuum. And those things are being implemented here locally. However, it's not being implemented everywhere across the country. And we all know that when we talk about things like this, this is more of a national narrative that we're talking about. And when we talk about how things should be trickled down from the top to the bottom, there's a saying, all politics are local. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of truth to that, being that a lot of times things have to start on the local level because it won't always happen, although it should, at the very top.
Well, it's, to me, you know, the thought process that I was considering is, okay, so I hear these conversations where we're cherry picking somebody else besides myself. Mm-hmm. If I'm a business owner, a merchant, and my staff doesn't know that things that we're doing are adversely affecting my business's success, that's a place, that's a space. If I'm missing talent among the applicants that come into my business that could make my business more successful, there's a space. Wow, we're going pretty quickly, and I'm going to take a brief break, and we'll be back to dig a little deeper into that conversation.
To be in the AP program, it not only offers you great opportunities in the classroom, but also outside. Like being a member of the AP program, I can come into college already being a sophomore in college, so I can completely skip 1 year just by completing all my AP credits and by taking the classes and passing the exams. I would recommend other students to take AP classes because being a member of the program offers so many benefits and helps you decide what you want to do in the future and where you want to go with your life.
When I hear, or when we hear people say, well, that's not necessary, we don't really need to get into this implicit bias training or awareness, who does it hurt when people don't get that kind of expanded relationship improving, cultural dynamic, accentuating? Who does it hurt?
It hurts the community. Everyone involved is affected by that. And the one thing that I could, that I think would be important for people to kind of look at it as a professional development is just part of ensuring the quality of the care that you provide for other people. It's a service. If you're in the service, business of service, then this is a good investment.
Healthcare, business.
All service-orientated industry need to have this implicit bias as part of their professional development. It shouldn't be a one-time thing. It should be something that's implemented throughout the year. And then tested, because it can be tested. We can, there is a valid test. It's called the Implicit Association Test by Harvard scientists Nozick, Baji, Greenwald. They are the ones who constructed it. It is an excellent way to identify implicit bias, and you could give pre and post tests. But the thing is that it is an ongoing thing. It's something that, just like going to get trained for any position, this should just be basic procedure. Military, everyone should be exposed to this.
I will say this, I look at it too like an inward and outward mindset as well. Inward mindset tells me that I don't need it. There's nothing wrong. The outward mindset is more inclusive. It looks at the totality of the community and it says, yeah, I think we do need it. There are some things that I've experienced. I can tell you this real quickly. When I was working on my master's back in 2000, I remember taking classes on the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, and I had a stats class, and we had a project to do. And I'm there with a bunch of military folks. I'm ex-military, and our subject was cultural diversity. And the professor didn't know what we were talking about. She thought we had made up something. So that's an example of there being a disconnect.
Right.
Okay. Now, she was not military, but all those who were in the military, we all kind of, those who were actively as well as those who were not, kind of looked at one another, and we were at awe because she didn't know what we were talking about. So, but it goes to show that there is an inward mindset in our communities and our organizations that are not inclusive, and sometimes they don't realize it. It's like looking in the mirror, like we talked before, and not realizing that you've gained weight, and having someone who's like you stand beside you and say, no, you haven't gained weight, and neither have I. Okay, until you try on the clothes
and they don't
of
fit.
the other person, and they don't fit.
Exactly.
Right. This is interesting conversation. Just last night, my son, who's a pharmacist, was giving COVID tests in one of the smaller communities. And they got a closed-in area, screened-in area, where you can give privacy so you can administer the test. So as people are waiting to get their test, he opens the door and says, come in so I can give you a test. And he says, you get this look like, you're giving me the test? You're giving me the shot? He said, yeah, come on in, let me give you the shot. And he had to, over and over and over again, disarm the person who came in to get a life-saving shot, to give him the shot. And then there were other people that came in and were like, I am so glad to see you. And he was like, he had to overcome a bias to help somebody.
I think where we go wrong at sometimes too, though, is that there is explicit and implicit is so, people are so unaware of it sometimes. And when we categorize everyone in the same category and we deem them as being something that is unflattering, okay, we alienate those who are more open to hearing it. And looking at themselves as opposed to being categorized as something that they feel like in their heart that they're not. So it's a fine line, but it's something that we can't be afraid of actually walking on and saying, hey, let's have a conversation.
So many of us, I think, are nervous and afraid of each other. And it might be unfounded. My dad was a science teacher, and he used to have snakes. Not all snakes are bad, but
really,
they aren't. Believe me. If you got a rat infestation, snakes
he could be your friend.
Can be your friend. But that's an example that comes to my mind. Until we train people beyond that, that's bad for the whole natural system.
Ecosystem, right?
The whole natural ecosystem. And that's true among humans too. If we're afraid of each other, that puts us in a position that we can't be best with and for each other. We got to be trained to stop being afraid of each other without cause.
And that's where that implicit bias, those unfounded fears come from. They've been implanted there. They're part of an innate sort of behavior, but it can be changed. And if you can reach one person, that's significant.
And as we wrap up, what would you leave us with that you think is the most profound thing you can say along the lines of what we've been discussing?
I think that there needs to be a demand, it has to be a demand by citizenry. Everyone to come together, whether they're Asian, Hispanic, African American, all of us, whether they're white, we need to come together to form a census to fight for equality. And what that means is that everyone has a basic equal standing. And know that some people are going to find resistance there, but once we come together, there's so many wonderful things that we can aspire to.
Well, you've said a lot today, and we really appreciate everything that you've shared with us and with our audience. So we'd love to have you back on at some point really soon. But this has been Safe Schools. It's been an enjoyable program. I'm Curtis Graves.
And I'm Andy Howard. Thank you for viewing.